This episode is brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to learn more. And welcome to the Fast Take. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
Hey guys, I'm Jack Murphy.
And we haven't done a Fast Take in a hot bit because we did this 2-part episode on domestic abuse in the military. And to give you all a little bit of background, our editors, the folks over at Stars and Stripes, are very particular. They like their T's crossed and like their I's dotted. So we took a lot of time. We took our time in putting this together to make sure that we got it right. Jack, this is a story that's been on your lap for a long time. This is something that's been kind of like bouncing around. We've talked about this story actually before this show ever began. Can you take me into a little bit of the background behind these last 2 episodes?
Yeah. This is like one of the roughest stories I've ever worked on. Selena came to me at this point, maybe like 7 years ago. And I began speaking with her. She began sharing a lot of documents with me about her story. I interviewed some other people who were witnesses to the things she was describing. I did, what a journalist is supposed to do. I started putting together this story. It was going to be an article about domestic abuse in the Army and Special Forces. And, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, I chickened out. Like, I got to a certain point with the story and it was just so dark that I couldn't, it's just one of those things where like your body freezes up and it's like, I can't do it anymore. Which is, I guess it's saying something. I've worked on a lot of like really tough stories. I worked on a story where a squad leader in the 101st Airborne was sexually assaulting male soldiers. I've worked on other domestic abuse stories. I've worked on soldier suicides, murders. The story I did for Stars and Stripes for Military Matters on the death of Mark Leshakar, and interviewing Mark's widow was probably like one of the toughest interviews I've ever done in my life. But Selena's story was something beyond all of that. What her and her children experienced was just beyond horrific. And, when we started talking about it, I brought it up with you, Rod, that, this was something that always was in the back of my mind, and it never sat well with me, and I was never happy with it. And I was upset with myself because I felt like I'd let Selena down. And when we started talking about it and I revisited this subject, and I, went and found the folder I had, and I had found an article that I had a half written article. It was like 3 pages long about Selena's story. And when I got to that point where I just couldn't keep working on it, and I was just like, oh my God, like I can't believe, how far along I got, before I stopped. And, so what I realized was, I had, Selena had continued talking to me, and we were friendly, and we started talking again. And that's when it kind of came, the idea struck me that instead of writing an article, a task that I attempted and failed at, that we could turn Selena's story into a podcast. And maybe that would be a new way for me to approach this subject, and also do the right thing for Selena at the same time.
Tell me a little bit about not too many things will unsettle you. You have had a remarkable career. You've been in a lot of places, seen a lot of things, but what is it about the story that really bothered you the most?
Man, I think it's the same with all of us. It's the kids,
it was the kids.
And Selena's a tough customer. Even, her being beaten in front of her children, and what they experienced, she's tough, but a little kid having to go through that is, it's wrong, obviously, regardless. I'm just saying it's the kids that hits harder, and the way that her ex-husband would abuse the animals, abuse the pets in front of the children to basically like scare them and get the entire family to comply. I mean, it's just beyond horrific, and and that really hits hard. And then the way that the Army, fails to deal with these issues is really upsetting. I mean, we all know that domestic abuse happens all over America. Something like 1 in 4 women in America experiences some sort of sexual assault. Like, when you really like drill down in the statistics, it's off the charts. It's crazy. It's all around us all the time. So it's no surprise that this stuff exists in the military as well. However, what upsets me is the way the military fails to handle it a lot of times. Even today, even as the public is much more aware, unfortunately, they're much more aware through stories like Selena's, through stories like Vanessa Guillen, all the stuff happening at Fort Hood and Fort Bragg. The public knows, but the military is just such a large bureaucracy. It takes, decades for the ship to change course.
That's 100% true. I think it's an interesting topic of domestic abuse in the military, because especially in light of the Vanessa Guillen case. And if there's anything the Vanessa Guillen case shed a light on, is that big things start small. The Vanessa Guillen case started with some harassment. It started with her making some complaints. It started with issues within the unit that just kept getting ignored, and excuses were made to ignore those issues. Now, domestic abuse is one of those things that for a long time, commands have said, well, this is an issue between those two. This is a marital issue. And that's something that Selena touched on, that she was told. This is a marital issue. This is not a violence issue. There's no safety issue. This is a marriage issue.
I worked on a story for Connecting Vets where an officer was abusing his wife, and the commanding officer brought the wife and the husband into his office and tried to play marriage counselor. And she's like in Texas. Actually, this was at Fort Hood, as I recall. Texas in the summer, wearing long sleeve shirts, long sleeve pants. And she's like, basically shaking in the office. And he's there like, oh, let's just try to keep this all in house, folks. We can resolve this here in this office. And it's like, under what auspices is a company commander or a battalion commander even remotely qualified to attempt something like this?
Well, but okay, I will give that commander a very small pass, very small one, because there is a programming, I think, in us that we don't want to get involved. We don't want to be part of the problem. We don't want to make this thing worse. We all want to make this thing smaller. We want to I think there's a hope that it's not as bad as we think it is. I will give you an example of that. When I was a young Joe, I was in Germany, and young E1, my neighbor used he got to the union, a good guy, seemed like a nice dude. His wife was much bigger than him. And I remember one day, there's a racket coming out of that house. I mean, we could hear through there was a small hallway between our two doors, and they're going at it. And I was going to go knock on the door and ask, is everything okay? Trying to be a good neighbor. And I opened the door, and just so happens that door opens at the same time, and it's him. And he is beat up.
Damn.
I mean, she beat him up, and he just sat there on the and I sat there on the steps with him, and we could hear her, just tearing the house apart. I mean, she was just on a rampage, and I'm like, dude, are you okay? And he's sniffling. He's like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm like, do you want to call the MPs? And he's like, no. I don't want to call anybody. Just let her burn out. Just let her burn it out. I'm like, has this happened before? Like, I don't know. I didn't know how to handle a domestic situation, especially when it was a guy getting abused.
Yeah. Yep.
And we ended up not calling the MPs. I want to say that we got him shelter. We got him away from her. No, they PCS, 3 years later. No idea whatever happened to them. But I was complicit in that. I told my first sergeant. He was like, well, that's just that's between them. but I'll talk to him. And I don't know if he ever did. It doesn't even matter because nothing was ever done. So that commander trying to play peacemaker, I kind of get it. But to your point, the Selena story could have gone another way.
Oh, yeah.
It could have gone, we could have been talking about the death of Selena.
Easily.
100%. Or the death of one of her children related to domestic abuse. We made this into two parts. And the first part was just really talking about her relationship and the abuse. The second part was really about the military's reaction or inactions to her allegations that, by the way, are supported. This isn't, and I was really afraid that people would think, well, this is a he said, she said situation. And it's not. I mean, the reports are there. Her outcries are there. Why somebody would make up some of these stories, well, that's beyond me.
Yeah, I mean, there's failures on a lot of these stories we're talking about. I mean, there's so many different failures at so many levels of leadership. It's not just like one person. It's not like one company commander that turned a blind eye. It's just people all across the board who turned a blind eye. With Selena's story, I mean, it's almost incomprehensible. I mean, some of this abuse happened in public. His teammates saw some of this stuff. When she started talking, and I mean, the way that Jag behaves is just like unreal. Where they told her they couldn't prosecute her husband because the abuse happened prior to his reenlistment, as if crimes that happen in a past enlistment go into a box and disappear. And, I confirmed with a JAG source that's total nonsense. I mean, as long as it's within the statute of limitations, they can prosecute. The military just chooses not to. They chose to sweep this stuff under the rug. It's really unfortunate. I think that Special Forces Command chose not to offer a comment after I asked. One of the general at the time that this happened, the guy who's running Special Forces Command was General Fran Beaudet, who I believe is a good person, who I think cares about Special Forces families. But he also chose not to comment on the story, which is unfortunate. I would like to dig deeper into the subject and try to understand why the bureaucracy behaved the way it did. But this is where we are.
I'm always interested when I hear we're not commenting on that or people don't comment on something like this. Even hey, we vehemently are against domestic abuse. We do our best or something. So
SF Command said that they would, but then nothing.
Then they didn't.
Yeah.
Does it matter that this was Special Forces? I mentioned this at the beginning of episode 1, the first part of the episode, because what I did not want to do was to make this about Special Forces. Because when you do that, I think it's polarizing. I think that it's almost excluding the rest of the world. It's almost like saying this is a Special Forces problem, which it's not. This is, I said it in the beginning of the episode. You can take Special Forces out of the equation. That's just the unit this dude was in. You can add 1st Armored Division, 3rd Infantry Division. You can call him a cook, clerk. Doesn't matter. We had a monster among us that was terrorizing his family. He wore a uniform and nobody did anything. That, to me, was the point of your story. Do you see it differently?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right that this is an army issue. It's a military issue. But because Special Forces is its own sort of subculture, there are certain particularisms that express themselves. When this stuff happens in special operations units, that they have this sort of public image and prestige that they're looking to maintain, and I think that adds some extra motivation to hide some of these things. For instance, the Special Operations Commands will go through great lengths to make sure that their soldiers do not appear in court wearing their uniforms. They will chapter them out of the military before a civilian trial just to make sure they're not appearing in court wearing a special forces uniform. They will go through pretty great lengths to try to protect the command and the command's image. So I mean that can add some extra layers to the story. And then also you have the fact that these guys are highly trained in some of the dynamics of that. And they're also specially selected. And the interesting thing about Selena's ex-husband is that there were warning signs as this guy went through the selection and training process. I was told by two sources that his psych evaluations during the Q course revealed him to be a psychopath. And he was actually at a barbecue bragging about it. And then I have a psych exam results that were done while he was at 7th Special Forces Group that show basically he has the highest level of sociopathy possible on the test. And I was also told by sources that he was torturing an animal during the Q course, and some of his fellow students, told the instructors about it. And then, of course, when this guy got onto his ODA, again, I had sources tell me that he was laughing during firefights, making fun of his teammates for being distraught about being in firefights. This dude was not right. And all the warning signs were there, but they were not heeded. And so that's one of the extra wrinkles on this story.
It makes me think that Special Forces takes it very personal in that way, that if one of their own turns out to be a bad apple, that the message to the public will be that we selected a bad apple. We wanted this somehow. We chose him for these things.
Right. That we're breeding psychopaths.
Right.
Which I don't believe is the case.
No, I don't believe that's the case either, because you can't have a bunch of those dudes winning. Those kinds of people don't win wars. Those kinds of people don't win anything. They destroy the world around them. To your point, the teammates were uncomfortable around him. If you're looking to make a career change or still trying to find your path outside the military, I recommend checking out Sabio, the coding bootcamp and developer community that's helped so many veterans become successful software engineers. Sabio teaches you the skills to start a real high-paying tech job in just 17 weeks, online and from the comfort of your own home. Visit sabio.la/military to learn how you can use your VA benefits to enroll. That's sabio.la/military. I'm curious, having been in the team room, again, I'm speaking ignorantly. I'm not a Special Forces guy. As a former Special Forces dude yourself, in the team room, isn't there, I would think there would be a process for the team to vote somebody off the island. Like, this guy is not fit, get him out of here. Is that a thing? Is that possible? How hard is that to do?
It really depends on how much support you have from your commander. If the team leader, company commander, battalion commander are on the same sheet of music, I think it's relatively easy to kick somebody off a team. But due to operational requirements, manning requirements, if the leadership is not on board, that process can be excruciating. I mean, you'd have to build up a packet of negative counseling statements and show some really tangible, reasons to convince the leadership directly above you to remove the guy. So it can be quite a pain to kick someone off and fire somebody from Special Forces. I mean, it happens. To get someone kicked off a team is one thing. That's not as difficult as kicking somebody out of the unit. To actually kick somebody out of Special Forces usually involves detabbing the person, where they strip away their Special Forces tab and insignia and beret. And that's a process that's like a big paperwork process that has to go through SF command and everything else, and it can take quite a while.
But I will say that what you described isn't that different from the conventional army. If I have a soldier
It's
who,
tough to get rid of them. Yeah.
yeah, if he's a problem child, it takes a lot for me to get him kicked out of the army. I could get him transferred to another company. There's ways to move them around. I hate to make the comparison to like Catholic Church stuff, but
Yeah.
I mean, we move them around, and I've
I'll,
seen it done.
I'll tell you, even in special forces, and I've heard this from many people, during the war on terror, we were deploying so often, we were deploying our soldiers all over the world so often that in a lot of cases, some people are not going to like me saying this, but in a lot of cases, as long as those warm bodies showed up for work on time, it was assumed by the command that these guys were all good to go, regardless of what kind of issues they had going on at home. You know, were they suffering from PTSD, substance abuse issues? As long as they showed up, that there's a green check in that ledger. This soldier has shown up at work. He is here on this team. He's good to deploy. And a lot of officers, special ops officers, made their careers on the backs of deploying these soldiers over and over and over again, regardless of their mental state. I mean, that was like that was definitely
Jack,
not the primary factor that was being considered.
everything you just said, if you take out the word special forces, is 100% applicable,
yeah,
to the big army. I won't speak for the Navy. I won't speak for organizations that I don't know much about, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I'm going to guess probably not that different from the Marine Corps, probably not that different from the Air Force, probably not that different from the Navy.
Yeah, probably right.
I think we live in a power, excuse me, we live in a PowerPoint driven military. I often wonder how different life would be if we didn't have PowerPoint, if we didn't try to convey the climate and status of a unit over one slide.
Yeah. Are you green on MedPros? All right, good to go.
Good to go. That's it. And like you said, it's a green check mark. We're not talking often about what's going on. How do people feel? What is the mental health of these people? The unfortunate truth is,
a lot of times, you know, there are good team sergeants out there, good team leaders, and they're monitoring their men and really do make efforts to take care of their soldiers. And really, that is where, you know, speaking about special forces in this case, this is where these elements sink or swim. And it has to do with that first line leadership. It has to do with those senior NCOs getting to know their men and investing in their soldiers. And when that happens, the system can work okay, you know, because you have good leadership there. You know, even if you have your battalion leadership, their head is in the clouds, whatever. But at least, you know, you have that first line, right? First line of defense, if you will. That's really looking after the troops, and that is where these ODAs make it or break it. I'm again, yeah, it's probably true in the infantry and, you know, those squad leaders, those platoon sergeants.
You know, I often get accused of being giving people too much of the benefit of a doubt. You know, giving people a second chance or a second look. I do want to say about this special forces guy that we've been talking about, Selena's husband. And I think to myself, I'm not a big fan of a MMPI, which is like that personality,
the MMPI
inventory, the Minnesota mission, whatever. A lot of weight is given to those psychological tests. I know for a fact, and I know this because, you know, from my own background as a mental health counselor, that sociopathy is extremely rare. It is often misdiagnosed. We got borderline personality disorder, manic depressive disorders. There's a lot of other things that can often look like sociopathy. I feel bad listening to the story. Of course, I feel for Selena and her children 100%, but I also feel bad for this guy. I feel bad for him in the sense that he's not getting the help that he needs as well. Anybody that's demonstrating that level of violence and anger and is not they're that social contract, shout out Jordan Peterson. I know I'm going to get hell for that right there. But we're talking about a person who is not properly aligned with society and what we deem as acceptable and unacceptable. This is a guy who's hurting inside. This is a man who needs professional help, and he's probably scared to get it. And the unfortunate truth is that as you go deeper into the military's elite programs, the military's elite training, your fear of being removed from those things due to mental health increases. And even though, and it was funny is in the intelligence world, they tell us all the time, guys, don't worry about it. It's not going to affect your security clearance. Just go get help. Go get help. I've heard it 1,000 times now, but there's still that fear because there are still questions like, when you're taking, when you're trying to go to special programs, they'll ask you, have you seen a counselor? Have you ever had suicide ideations? And it's like, I don't want to lie. So you don't go to those counselors.
I took a psych exam when I was in special forces, and I asked the shrink to explain it to me. I was like, can you explain the results of this to me? And he's like, and one of the things he explained to me, he's like, you're making yourself appear healthier than you are. And he said that's a very like common known phenomena. He's like, all of you guys do that because you're taking this test to apply for a school. And so you're all trying to make yourself seem like you're better qualified than you actually are. So he's like, yeah, you guys ain't like these questions like, have you ever have a headache? And you're like, no,
never.
Yeah.
I've never had a headache. I don't know what you're talking about. It's kind of like when you're going through MEPS. They're like, have you ever seen a doctor? Not since I was born.
Yeah.
You've never seen a doctor. And it's just the way that you do things. I don't know if there's an actually accurate way to assess somebody's proper mental health because, either you're trying to stay in or you're trying to get out. Very few people are just going to answer the questions honestly without some type of personal agenda. But nevertheless, yes, this story was about Selena and her survival. And I think that's what we need to focus on. And as far as this man is concerned, this gentleman is concerned, if he hears this story, I hope it provides reflection. I hope it provides an opportunity for him to go, holy smokes, I need help. I need to go talk to somebody. The game is over for me. I believe he's out. He's done. Or is he still in?
No, he's out.
He's out. This could be an opportunity for him to find and do the work. I hope that if there's anybody's listening to this, and listen, man, if you're listening to this story, and I'm speaking to the audience here, if you listen to the Selena story and you are the abuser, we often talk about the abused and we always tell them, like, get out, seek shelter, find programs, and that's great. But here's the thing. If you're an abuser, you need to seek help. You need to get out of those relationships. Stop hurting those around you. Start doing the work, and it's hard work, figuring out why you have these issues with anger, why you're doing the things you're doing. But I will say you're fixable. People are fixable. But the thing is, Jack can't fix you. I can't fix you. Your spouse can't fix you. Your kids can't fix you. You have to fix you. And that's the bottom line. There's no way around it. There's no magic pill. There's no, 12-step program that you're going to come out step 12 and be like, I'm a cured. You're going to do the work, and it's going to be continuous, probably your whole life. You're probably going to have to be doing the work and literally trying to be a good person every single day. And that's tough, but you can do it. It's just going to take that work. And of course, if you're on the other end of this abuse story, 100% go find those resources. But that was another issue, right, Jack? She went to go find those resources, and they kind of dropped the ball.
Yeah, they didn't exist, or they were in sort of a nascent sort of phase where there was like abuse advocates in place, but they didn't really have any power to do anything. And Selena, which I think is great, is she has worked with legislators and has gotten very involved in this particular issue in reform. So I think the military is a little bit better off now. But my take on this situation is, again, it's a huge ship that takes a very long time to change course. Speaking of the military bureaucracy, and that bureaucracy really only responds, as a friend of mine once told me, it really only responds to shame and lawsuits. And, that's kind of my role, is to shame the military on cases like this and keep these stories in the news and on the forefront and make sure that nobody can forget about this topic until the ship has changed course. So I know the military is changing. They are making some positive steps at reform, but it's really incumbent, I think, on journalists, victims advocates, people like that, to keep the pressure on.
Well, it comes kind of back to your critics. How dare you, Jack Murphy, shame the military and bring out the worst stories? And our response is always, well, how dare we? How dare you? How dare you cover these things up? How dare you not help these families? How dare you? And I will say, folks, the future of spicy content, the future of spicy stories, the future of stories that bring out some of the negative side of, unfortunately, special forces keeps, regardless of the fact they're special forces, they keep kind of bubbling up to the top of the news cycle, and there's probably more to come. I think that we were, the Mark Leshikar stories, those stories have far-reaching consequences, and we're beginning to see that some of the stories about that saw the light of day last year, those are having those are echoing out forward. Those are rippling forward, and they're meeting new issues, and new things are coming to light. So, buckle up. I think it's going to be a rough year. I think this is going to be what are we in February? It's going to be a tough year for, I think, the military, unfortunately. And I hope it's a lesson for future commanders to go, hey, we should do more to fix these situations before they get out of hand, and be a little bit more open. But we'll see. Jack, you got any parting words for us, bud?
No, I think I said as much as I could say on this. We do have a future episode coming up where I interviewed a veteran and a journalist who is very active in covering the situation down at Fort Bragg, some of the topics we've talked about here today. And he's actually working on a book about it. So, yeah, we'll have that for you, I guess, in a few weeks.
All right, folks. As always, you can find us at Stripes Pod on Twitter. You can follow Jack Murphy, RGR, literally everywhere. You got to give the man some credit. He's consistent. He knows how to handle his social handles. And you can find me on Twitter as well as RodPod. Rod, I'm not nearly as active as the Autumn Man himself.
Autumn Man is in retirement.
It's in retirement. What are we at
now?
It's Winter Man.
Seasonal thing.
It's a seasonal thing. It's Winter Man, and God only knows what Winter Man will bring. And I'm just glad that Jack is not frozen inside of his home in New York. I was watching the news, and it was like negative 108 up north and like near Delaware or some nonsense, like subarctic temperatures. Like, what is happening to the Northeast?
Yeah, I mean, upstate New York, I think is pretty brutal. Here, I mean, it's like 30, 40 degrees. It's not too bad.
Not too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, none of that day after tomorrow nonsense. The Statue of Liberty's not like blown over with ice yet.
Icicles hanging from my eyelashes. No, it's not that bad.
All right, folks. I'm Rod Rodriguez. That's Jack Murphy. Make sure you follow us on stripes.com. Don't forget to go to stripes.com. Use promo code podcast and get 50% off your digital subscription. Boom. Did it. All right, folks. That does it for us. We will see you at the next episode. This episode is brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to learn more.